Good evening. This is Fear Knocks. Out on America's rest stops, the night shift sees things you won't find in any public report. Attendants hear footsteps pacing behind locked service rooms, radios pick up breathing on channels that aren't in use, and the security lights flicker only when someone is standing just outside their reach. If you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss our daily true horror stories. And tell us where you're watching from and what time. Your comments help us keep this channel alive after dark. Most of the incidents you're about to hear came from night watch crews who worked alone, miles from the nearest town, and swore they weren't the only ones moving in those empty corridors after midnight. Let's begin. I worked the night shift as a custodian for the highway rest stop network. It was late autumn, and the sodium lights cast long, weak shadows across the empty parking lot. One night, a faint sound began to mirror my movements in the men's restroom hall. My routine was simple, established over several years. I maintained a series of rest stops along a stretch of highway, covering about 100 miles each night. The work involved cleaning the restrooms, restocking supplies, emptying trash receptacles, and generally ensuring the facilities were presentable for travelers. Most of my shift was spent in isolation, moving through the quiet, echoing spaces of the concrete blocks. The only constant sounds were the distant hum of the highway, the occasional rumble of a passing truck, and the low buzz of the sodium lights overhead. The air inside the buildings was usually cool, a stark contrast to the often frigid night air outside. I relied on my flashlight beam to cut through the dimness, even with the overhead lights on. This particular night, I was at the Midpoint Rest Stop, a larger facility with separate men's and women's restroom blocks, a small information kiosk, and a vending alcove connecting the two. I had just finished the women's side and was moving into the men's. The floor was a standard commercial tile, a pale gray, laid in a grid pattern. My work boots made a distinct, rhythmic sound on the hard surface as I walked, a steady thump, thump, thump. As I moved down the long hall toward the stalls, I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible thump, thump, thump behind me. It matched my cadence perfectly, a quiet echo. I stopped. The sound stopped. I took another step. It resumed. I paused again, listening intently. The sound vanished. I attributed it to the building settling, or perhaps the wind playing tricks with the ventilation system. The wind had picked up that evening, bringing a sharp cold front. I continued my work, but the sound persisted, always a step or two behind me, always mirroring my pace. It was never loud enough to be definitive, just a suggestion, a ghost of my own movement. I tried to dismiss it, focusing on the mundane tasks of cleaning and restocking. The isolation of the night shift often played tricks on the mind, I knew that. The next night, the mirroring footsteps returned. This time, I was prepared. I had brought a small, portable audio recorder with me, placing it near the entrance to the men's restroom hall. I wanted to capture the sound, to prove it was nothing more than an acoustic anomaly. As I began my cleaning routine, the faint thump, thump, thump started again, trailing me. I walked slowly, deliberately, trying to isolate the sound. It seemed to originate from the far end of the hall, near the main entrance, but always behind me. I completed my tasks, then retrieved the recorder. Back in my small utilitarian office at the main depot, I reviewed the audio. There was nothing distinct, only the ambient hum of the building and the clear sound of my own footsteps. The mirroring sound was too subtle, too elusive for the single microphone to pick up. It was frustrating. A few nights later, the phenomenon intensified. I was in the vending alcove, which was illuminated by a single flickering sodium light. The alcove connected the two restroom blocks and housed a bank of vending machines. The compressor on the drink machine would cycle on and off, creating a low, steady hum that would periodically cut out, leaving a brief, profound silence. As I was wiping down the counter, the compressor cycled off. In that sudden quiet, a distinct shadow passed across the wall opposite me, briefly obscuring the faint glow from the snack machine. It was a fleeting movement, too quick to properly register, but it was there. It was a dark shape, not quite human, but definitely not a natural play of light. My heart rate quickened. I spun around, but the alcove was empty. The compressor kicked back on, filling the space with its familiar drone. I checked the CCTV feed from the alcove later that night. The footage was grainy, but it clearly showed the brief interruption of light, a dark form passing through the frame. It was too indistinct to identify, but it was undeniably there. This was no longer just an auditory illusion. I decided to approach the situation methodically. I requested permission to install additional monitoring equipment. My supervisor, accustomed to my detailed reports, approved it as a building integrity and security assessment. I set up a pair of sensitive condenser microphones in the men's restroom hall, spaced about 20 feet apart, connected to a multi-track recorder. I also installed a contact microphone on the main ventilation duct running through the ceiling of the hall. I wanted to capture any structural vibrations or air movement that might be causing the sounds. Over the next few nights, I meticulously logged my movements, the wind direction and speed, and the ambient temperature inside and outside the building. I also reviewed the CCTV footage from the vending alcove more closely. The shadow appeared sporadically, always during a compressor lull, always moving from one end of the alcove to the other, never lingering. It was a consistent, fleeting presence. The dual microphones in the restroom hall began to yield some data. When the wind shifted direction outside, particularly when it gusted from the north, the contact mic on the vent picked up a distinct rattle, a low vibration that resonated through the ductwork. This vibration, when analyzed, had a frequency that could, under certain acoustic conditions, mimic a faint impact on the tile floor. It was a plausible explanation for some of the mirroring footsteps. However, the dual condenser mics, while picking up my own footsteps clearly, never registered a second distinct set of impacts. The mirroring sound remained elusive to direct capture. It was always just beyond the threshold of the recording equipment, a whisper of a sound that only my ears seemed to process. I spent hours reviewing the data. The wind logs showed a strong correlation between the northern gusts and the vent rattle. The temperature logs indicated that the building's concrete slab and steel frame would expand and contract with the significant temperature swings between day and night, especially with the cold front moving in. This expansion and contraction could cause creaks and groans in the building's fascia and internal structures, sounds that might be misinterpreted. I even took a photograph of the tile pattern, wondering if some optical illusion was at play. I tried to find a rational explanation for everything. The shadow in the vending alcove was harder to dismiss. It was a visual event, captured on camera, however indistinct. I cross-referenced the times of the shadow appearances with the wind and temperature logs. There was no clear correlation. It seemed independent of the environmental factors affecting the building's acoustics. The shadow was a separate, unsettling variable. My official report detailed the acoustic anomalies, attributing them primarily to wind-induced vibrations in the ventilation system and the natural expansion and contraction of the building materials. I included the dual mic recordings and the contact mic data as evidence. The CCTV footage of the vending alcove shadow was noted as an unidentified visual artifact, likely a trick of light or a transient reflection. I filed the report, along with my logbook entries and the raw data. The RCMP detachment that oversaw the highway network reviewed my findings. They found no evidence of trespass or any security breach. The file was closed. I continued my night watch, moving through the quiet rest stops. The faint mirroring footsteps in the restroom hall eventually faded, or perhaps I simply learned to tune them out. The vent rattle remained, a familiar companion on windy nights. The vending machine compressor still cycled on and off, creating those brief moments of profound silence. I never saw the shadow again, but I always felt a subtle shift in the air when the compressor went quiet, a momentary tension in the space. I still work the night shift. The highway hums on, an endless ribbon of sound and light. Sometimes, when the wind is just right and the building groans in the cold, I hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible thump, thump, thump behind me. It's just the building, I tell myself. It's just the wind. But I still find myself pausing, listening, waiting for the sound to stop when I do. I was on night watch at the highway rest stop. It was late autumn, a cold night, with a thin fog settling. A faint rhythmic tapping began near the vending machines. My shift had started just after sundown, a routine I knew well. The rest stop block sat a little off the main highway, a concrete and glass structure surrounded by a large gravel parking lot. Trucks idled in the distance, their low hum a constant background. Sodium lights cast a dull orange glow across the asphalt, barely penetrating the deepening fog. My job was to monitor the facility, ensure everything was secure, and log any unusual activity. I had a small office near the main entrance, equipped with monitors for the CCTV cameras and a radio for dispatch. The air outside was barely above freezing, and the building's heating system pushed a steady, warm air through the vents. I had already completed my initial perimeter check, noting the frost beginning to form on the parked vehicles. The night promised to be quiet, like most others. The first tap was barely audible, a soft, distinct sound. It came from the vending nook, an alcove set into the main wall of the building, just past the restrooms. I initially dismissed it as the settling of the building, or perhaps a loose panel in the vending machine itself. The structure was older, and fascia creaks were common, especially with temperature shifts. I continued my logbook entries, detailing the weather conditions and the number of vehicles present. A few minutes later, the tap repeated, followed by another, then a pause. It was a 2-2-1 pattern, distinct and deliberate. I paused my writing, listening more closely. The compressor hum from the drink machines was constant, a low thrumming that usually masks smaller sounds. This tapping cut through it. I checked the interior camera feed for the vending nook. The camera showed an empty space, the machines standing silent under the fluorescent lights. No one was visible. I rewound the feed a few minutes, watching for any movement. Nothing. The taps had been clear though, too precise to be random. I decided to investigate in person. Stepping out of my office, the air in the main hall felt cooler than my small space. The silence of the building was broken only by the distant truck hum and the faint buzz of the sodium lights outside. As I approached the vending nook, The tapping stopped. The space was empty, just as the camera had shown. I ran my hand along the metal casing of the drink machine, feeling for any vibration or loose parts. Everything felt solid. I checked the snack machine next, then the change dispenser. All appeared normal. I returned to my office, feeling a slight unease. The taps had been too clear to be imagined. I reviewed the audio from the interior microphones, isolating the vending nook feed. The recording clearly captured the 221 pattern. It sounded like something striking a hard surface, perhaps metal or concrete. I cross-referenced the time with the exterior cameras. The north side of the building, where the vending nook was located, had a series of metal louvers covering a utility access panel. These louvers were known to rattle in strong winds. I checked the wind log for the last hour. The data showed only light gusts, nothing significant enough to cause such a distinct, rhythmic sound. The temperature log indicated a steady drop, but no sudden shifts that might cause structural expansion or contraction. I decided to set up a contact mic on the exterior wall, directly behind the vending nook. This would give me a clearer audio feed of any external sounds. I bundled up, grabbing my flashlight, and stepped outside. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to a few yards. The cold air bit at my exposed skin. I walked around to the north side of the building, the gravel crunching under my boots. The louvers were still. I attached the mic to the concrete wall, running the cable back to a small portable recorder in my office. As I re-entered the building, I heard it again. The 221 tap, now slightly muffled, but unmistakable. It was coming from the north side, just as I suspected. Back in my office, I put on headphones, listening to the live feed from the contact mic. The taps were clearer now, sounding like knuckles on a hard surface. They repeated the pattern, then stopped. I watched the exterior camera feed for the north side. The fog was a dense white wall, obscuring everything beyond a few feet from the lens. I could see the edge of the building, the metal louvers, but nothing else. The taps started again, a little further down the wall, closer to the corner. This was unusual. The wind log still showed only light, intermittent gusts. The taps were too consistent, too deliberate to be random wind noise. I began to feel a prickle of unease. This wasn't just a building settling. I started to correlate the tapping with the wind data more closely. The taps seemed to occur during brief lulls in the wind, or just as a gust began to pick up. It was almost as if something was using the wind to mask its presence, or to time its movements. I reviewed the exterior camera footage again, focusing on the moments just before and after the taps. The fog made it difficult, but I thought I saw a slight distortion in the mist near the corner of the building. It was fleeting, like a shadow moving just beyond the camera's effective range. The taps continued, moving slowly along the north wall, always maintaining the 2-2-1 rhythm. It was a methodical progression. I contacted dispatch, reporting unusual sounds and potential trespass. They advised caution and said they would send a patrol unit, but it would take some time to reach my isolated location. I kept my eyes on the monitors, my ears tuned to the contact mic. The taps moved around the northwest corner of the building, heading towards the west side. This side had fewer cameras, mostly covering the truck parking area. The fog was still thick, making any visual confirmation nearly impossible. The taps were now fainter, but still present. It felt like something was circling the building, testing its perimeter. The isolation of the rest stop became more pronounced in the quiet night. The hum of the distant trucks seemed to fade into the background. I decided to make another perimeter check, this time with more caution. I grabbed my heavy flashlight and a radio, keeping dispatch informed of my movements. The cold outside was sharper now, the fog even denser. I moved slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel. I swept the powerful beam of my flashlight across the building's exterior, trying to pierce the white curtain of mist. The west side of the building was dark, the sodium lights not reaching fully around the corner. I heard a faint, almost imperceptible whisper on the radio static, but it was just interference. I kept moving, my senses heightened. The taps had stopped again. The silence was heavy, broken only by my own breathing and the distant highway noise. As I rounded the southwest corner, heading back towards the main entrance, I caught a glimpse of something on the ground. It was a fresh boot print in the thin layer of frost that had settled on the gravel. The print was clear, distinct, and pointed away from the building, towards the forest line that bordered the rest stop property. I took a quick photograph with my phone, noting its position. The print was large, indicating a heavy boot. I continued my patrol, my flashlight beam sweeping the ground for more evidence. I found another print, then another, leading towards the tree line. They were spaced evenly, suggesting a steady, unhurried pace. The taps had been a distraction, a way to draw my attention to one side while movement occurred elsewhere. The patrol unit arrived about an hour later, their headlights cutting through the fog. I showed them the boot prints and explained the tapping pattern. They conducted a thorough search of the perimeter and the nearby forest trail, but found nothing else. The fog had begun to lift slightly, and the frost was melting, making any further prints indistinguishable. They filed a report, noting the potential trespass, but without a clear suspect or any damage, there was little more to do. I logged the incident in my own report, detailing the audio evidence and the wind data. The North Louver Pattern, as I called it, remained an unexplained anomaly. I finished my shift as dawn broke, the sun burning off the last of the fog. The rest stop returned to its normal daytime hum. The incident was officially closed, filed away as a minor disturbance. I still review the footage sometimes, listening to the isolated audio of the 221 taps. I look at the wind logs, the temperature shifts, trying to find a natural explanation. I still hear it sometimes, that quiet, deliberate pattern, especially on cold, foggy nights. I was the night watch supervisor for a network of highway rest stops, overseeing operations from a small, isolated cabin. The season was late autumn, and the air outside carried a sharp, biting cold, barely above freezing. That night, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound began to register on the perimeter microphones. My routine involved monitoring a series of remote sites along a major northern highway. Each rest stop consisted of a main block housing restrooms, a vending alcove, and a small information kiosk, all illuminated by the low orange glow of sodium lights. Beyond the main structure, a designated dog run area offered a patch of gravel and sparse grass, enclosed by a chain-link fence. The constant hum of idling trucks provided a baseline sound, a low thrum that often masked other, subtler noises. My job was to filter through this ambient noise, identifying anything out of place. I logged everything, from wind direction changes to building expansion temperatures, maintaining a meticulous record in the logbook. The first sequence of clicks came through the audio feed from the dog run area. It was a clear, metallic sound, distinct from the usual louver rattle or the distant compressor hum of the vending machines. The sound repeated in a precise pattern. 6 individual clicks, followed by a brief silence, then another 6. I noted it down, initially attributing it to a loose chain striking the fence in the wind. The wind log showed a steady breeze that night, consistent with such an explanation. I made a mental note to check the CCTV feed for that specific zone later, once my primary rounds were complete. The isolation of these sites meant that any anomaly, however small, warranted a procedural review. About an hour later, the clicking returned. This time, the pattern was identical. 6 distinct metallic strikes, but the sound profile was subtly different. It seemed sharper, less resonant, as if striking a different material. I pulled up the live audio feed for the dog run again, cross-referencing it with the wind data. The breeze had picked up slightly, but the previous explanation of a chain striking the fence felt less convincing. I adjusted the gain on the paired mics positioned near the dog run, trying to isolate the source. The sound was intermittent, appearing for a few minutes, then fading, only to return from a slightly different angle within the same general area. I began to suspect something more than just environmental factors. I initiated a full review of the CCTV footage from the past hour, focusing on the dog run. The low sodium light cast long shadows, making details difficult to discern. The camera covered the fence line and a portion of the gravel path. I saw no animals, no people, nothing that could account for the precise, repeated sequence of 6 clicks. The wind was visible in the swaying branches of the sparse trees at the edge of the forest, but the fence itself appeared still. I checked the contact mic readings from the fence posts, which showed only minor vibrations consistent with wind pressure. The clicks were not originating from the fence itself. This ruled out my initial, simple explanation. The next occurrence of the clicks was the most unsettling. It happened about 30 minutes after my CCTV review. The sound did not come from the dog run feed this time. Instead, it registered on the microphones positioned near the main building's exterior, specifically near the vending alcove. The pattern was unmistakable. 6 precise, metallic clicks. This was a significant shift. The dog run was a good distance from the main building, separated by a stretch of gravel parking lot. Whatever was causing the sound had moved, or there were 2 distinct sources. The sound was now closer, clearer, and carried a different acoustic signature. Less like a chain, more like a tool striking a hard surface. Perhaps metal on concrete, or metal on the building's fascia. I immediately switched to the CCTV feed for the vending alcove. The camera provided a wide view of the exterior wall and the entrance to the alcove. The area was empty. The sodium lights cast a harsh, flat illumination, revealing every detail of the concrete pad and the metal siding. There was nothing visible, yet the audio feed continued to register the clicks, sometimes faint, sometimes stronger, always in sequences of 6. The sound seemed to emanate from just beyond the camera's field of view, or perhaps from an angle that the lens could not capture directly. It was a frustrating, disembodied presence, audible but unseen. I began a more systematic investigation. I cross-referenced the audio events with the rest stop's internal temperature logs. Building expansion and contraction can create various creaks and groans, especially during cold nights. The temperature had been stable for the past few hours, barely fluctuating. This ruled out structural noises. I then checked the wind logs again. The wind had shifted slightly, but it was not strong enough to cause such distinct, repetitive sounds. The sound was too deliberate, too patterned, to be random environmental noise. It felt like an intentional act. I activated the contact microphones on the exterior wall of the vending alcove. These devices are designed to pick up vibrations directly from the structure. The contact mics remained silent. This was puzzling. If something was striking the building, the contact mics should have registered it. The sound was clearly audible on the air microphones, but not through direct contact with the structure. This suggested the source was not directly touching the building, but was very close to it, perhaps just a few feet away, in the blind spot of the camera. The implication was that something was moving around the building, just out of sight, making these precise, rhythmic sounds. The next sequence of 6 clicks came from the interior microphones, specifically those placed within the vending alcove itself. This was a critical development. Whatever it was, it had moved inside the building, or at least to the threshold. The sound was now muffled, echoing slightly off the tiled walls, but still undeniably present. It was a duller, heavier sound now, less metallic, more like something dense being tapped. The interior CCTV showed the empty alcove, the vending machines silently humming, their indicator lights glowing. No one was there. The silence on the video feed contrasted sharply with the distinct clicks on the audio. I felt a cold dread settle in. This was no longer a simple case of a loose chain or wind-induced creaks. Something was moving through the rest stop, unseen by the cameras, yet leaving an acoustic trail. I reviewed the exterior cameras again, trying to find any flicker, any shadow, anything that might indicate a presence. The fog had begun to roll in, thick and heavy, obscuring the distant highway lights in the forest beyond. The visibility dropped significantly, turning the parking lot into a gray, indistinct expanse. The isolation of the cabin felt more pronounced, the distance from the rest stop block suddenly vast. I contacted dispatch, reporting an unusual acoustic anomaly and a potential trespasser. They advised caution and initiated a log entry, but a patrol unit was a long drive away, probably an hour or more. I knew I was on my own for a while. I continued to monitor the feeds, my focus sharpened by the growing unease. The clicks did not return from inside the vending alcove. Instead, the next sequence registered on the exterior microphones again, but further away, near the edge of the parking lot, close to the trail that led into the forest. The sound was fainter now, almost a whisper, but still the distinct pattern of 6. I zoomed the exterior camera to its maximum, peering into the swirling fog. The headlights of passing trucks cut brief, distorted paths through the mist, illuminating nothing but the swirling vapor. The gravel crunched under the tires of the few vehicles that pulled in, their engines a low rumble. I saw no figure, no movement, nothing to explain the precise, rhythmic sounds that had now traversed the entire rest stop area. The sound faded completely after that, swallowed by the fog and the ambient hum of the highway. I spent the rest of the night reviewing the recorded audio, isolating the clicks, trying to find any additional evidence. My report detailed the sequence of events, the audio analysis, and the lack of visual confirmation. The RCMP patrol arrived at dawn, finding nothing but the lingering frost on the ground and the empty rest stop. They filed a report, noting the unusual circumstances, but without physical evidence, it remained an open case. I included the audio files and the CCTV footage in the official file, hoping for some future explanation. The incident was logged as an unexplained acoustic event, a minor footnote in the daily logbook. I still work the night watch, and the highway hums on. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of a particularly cold night, when the fog rolls in thick from the forest, I listen for it. I listen for that precise, metallic sequence of 6 clicks, moving through the darkness. I was a night watchman for the provincial highway network. My shift began just as the last daylight faded. A faint, rhythmic thudding sound caught my attention. My route covered a series of rest stops along a long stretch of highway, far from any major towns. This particular block, designated Site 7, was a standard design. A low-slung concrete structure housing restrooms, a vending alcove, and a small information kiosk. It was late autumn, and the air carried the sharp bite of approaching winter. A thin fog often rolled in from the surrounding forest, making the sodium lights cast long, indistinct shadows. My job was routine: check the locks, clear any litter, ensure the facilities were operational, and log any anomalies. The hum of distant truck engines was the usual soundtrack, a constant, low vibration that became part of the background. My patrol started at dusk, moving from one isolated facility to the next. The routine was designed to be predictable, a steady rhythm against the vast quiet of the northern landscape. I would drive my patrol vehicle, a standard-issue pickup, along the gravel access roads, parking near the main entrance. The first walkthrough involved a visual inspection of the exterior, checking for vandalism or damage. Then I would enter, ensuring the interior lights were functioning and the heating system was maintaining a comfortable temperature. I carried a small flashlight, but the interior was usually well lit by the overhead fluorescent panels. My logbook was always with me, ready to record even the smallest detail. This was a job that demanded vigilance and a methodical approach, especially during the long, dark nights. The sound that evening was subtle at first, a dull, percussive beat emanating from the service block. It was not the usual creak of the building settling or the rattle of the exhaust louvers in the wind. This was distinct, a solid thump, 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 like a heavy heel striking a floor. It seemed to come from the rear of the men's restroom, near the janitor's closet. I checked the restroom first, walking slowly between the stalls. The sound persisted, muffled but clear. It was too regular to be a random noise, too deliberate to be a structural shift. I approached the janitor's closet door. It was a standard steel door, painted institutional beige, secured with a heavy-duty padlock. The thudding seemed to originate directly from behind it. I pressed my ear against the cool metal. The sound was louder now, a deep, resonant thump that vibrated through the door itself. It felt like something heavy was being dropped or kicked against the interior wall. I considered the possibility of a water hammer, a common plumbing issue where a sudden change in water pressure causes pipes to bang. The building's plumbing ran through that section. I had heard water hammers before, but they were usually erratic, a series of sharp, violent jolts. This was different. This was a steady, almost rhythmic impact, spaced by a few seconds of silence before resuming. It was too consistent, too deliberate. I tried the door handle. It was locked, as expected. The padlock was secure and the frame showed no signs of tampering. I pulled out my radio and contacted dispatch, reporting a possible plumbing issue and an unusual noise. They logged the call and advised me to monitor the situation. I walked around the exterior of the building, checking the back wall where the closet was located. The concrete was cold and damp. There was nothing visible from the outside. No signs of disturbance, no open windows, no access points. The wind picked up, carrying a faint whisper through the pines. The sodium lights cast a sickly yellow glow over the gravel lot, highlighting the frost forming on the parked vehicles. Returning inside, the thudding had paused. The silence felt heavier than the noise had. I waited, listening intently. After a minute or so, it resumed, just as before. Thump, thump, thump. It was slower now, with longer pauses between each series of impacts. I retrieved my acoustic kit from the patrol vehicle. This kit included a pair of sensitive microphones and a contact mic designed to pick up vibrations through solid surfaces. I attached the contact mic to the janitor's closet door, securing it with magnetic clamps. The other microphone, a directional condenser, I positioned a few feet away, aimed at the door. I put on the headphones. The sound through the contact mic was startlingly clear. It was not the sharp, metallic clang of pipes. It was a dull, heavy impact, followed by a slight scraping sound, then another impact. It sounded less like a pipe and more like something dense, perhaps a boot striking the wall. The directional mic picked up the ambient hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant drone of highway traffic. But the thudding was distinct, isolated. I recorded several minutes of the audio, noting the precise timing and character of each impact. The scraping sound was particularly unsettling. It suggested movement, a dragging or shifting against the interior surface of the door or wall. I reviewed the CCTV footage from the rest stop's exterior cameras. The cameras covered the parking lot and the main entrances, but not the specific rear wall of the janitor's closet. The footage showed nothing unusual. A few trucks parked, their engines idling, a couple of cars pulling in and out. No one approached the building from the rear. No one lingered near the service entrance. The fog was thickening, obscuring the distant forest line. I checked the wind log for the night. The wind direction was consistent, blowing from the northwest, which would carry any external sounds away from the building, not towards it. The temperature log showed a steady drop, barely above freezing. I decided to conduct a more thorough inspection. I retrieved the master key for the janitor's closet. My instructions were clear. Only open the closet if absolutely necessary and if there was a clear safety concern. An unusual, persistent thudding sound from a locked room certainly qualified. I radioed dispatch again, informing them of my intent to enter the closet. They acknowledged, reminding me to proceed with caution. I stood before the door, the heavy padlock glinting under the fluorescent light. The thudding had stopped again. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low buzz of the sodium lights outside. I took a deep breath. I unlocked the padlock, the click echoing in the quiet space. I slowly pulled the door open, just a crack at first. The interior was dark. I aimed my flashlight inside. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing the usual collection of cleaning supplies. Mops, buckets, a utility sink, shelves stacked with paper towels and soap. Everything appeared to be in its place. There was no one inside, no one hiding, no one visible. I pushed the door fully open and stepped inside, sweeping the flashlight beam across every surface. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant. I checked behind the shelves, under the sink, in every corner. Nothing. I examined the walls. The interior wall, directly opposite the door, showed no signs of impact. No scuff marks, no dents, no disturbed dust. I ran my hand along the painted concrete. It was smooth and intact. I then turned my attention to the door itself, the interior surface. There, near the bottom hinge, was a series of faint, horizontal scuff marks. They were low, about knee height, and slightly curved, as if something had been dragged or scraped against the metal. They were not fresh, but they were distinct. More importantly, on the door frame, near the hinge side, I found something else. There were subtle indentations on the metal frame, just above and below the lower hinge. They were small, barely visible, but they were there. They looked like pry marks, consistent with a tool being inserted and leveraged. They were not deep enough to have compromised the lock or the hinge pins, but they indicated an attempt. Someone had tried to force the door open from the hinge side. The marks aligned perfectly with the scuff marks on the door itself, suggesting whatever was making the thudding sound was also attempting to gain entry from the inside. But the closet had been empty. It was always empty when I checked it. I documented everything with my camera, taking multiple photographs of the pry marks and the scuff marks. I noted the exact location and character of each mark in my logbook. I also made a detailed sketch. The implications were unsettling. If someone had been inside, they had either escaped without a trace, or they had never been there at all. The thudding and scraping sounds, captured on my audio recorder, were undeniable. They were too consistent, too deliberate to be a random structural noise. The contact mic had confirmed the impacts were solid, not fluid. I secured the closet again, double-checking the padlock. I filed a comprehensive report with dispatch, attaching the audio recordings and photographs. The RCMP was notified. An officer arrived a few hours later, just as the first hint of dawn was breaking through the fog. He reviewed my notes, listened to the audio, and inspected the closet. He confirmed the pry marks and the scuffs. The official report noted an attempted break-in, though the circumstances remained unexplained. There was no evidence of forced entry from the outside, and no one was found inside. The incident was logged as unresolved. My shift ended, and I drove home through the lifting fog, the highway quiet. The memory of that rhythmic thudding stayed with me. I often thought about the scraping sound, the way it suggested something heavy being dragged. I still hear it sometimes, especially on quiet nights, a faint echo in the back of my mind. I was on the night watch patrol, covering a stretch of highway rest stops. The air was barely above freezing, and a thin fog had settled over the highway. A faint, irregular tapping sound began to carry on the wind. My shift began just after dark, a routine I had followed for years. The route covered about 300 miles of highway, dotted with a dozen rest areas. My primary responsibility involved checking the facilities, ensuring security, and logging any anomalies. This particular night, I was at the third stop on my loop, a newer block of restrooms and vending alcoves set back from the main road. The structure was mostly concrete and steel, designed for durability in harsh weather. Sodium lights cast a dim, orange glow across the gravel parking lot, illuminating the idling trucks and a few passenger vehicles. The usual hum of the compressor unit and the low thrum of distant truck engines were the dominant sounds. My routine was precise. I would park my patrol vehicle near the main entrance, conduct a perimeter check, then move inside to inspect the restrooms and utility rooms. Each door, window, and access panel received a thorough visual inspection. I carried a small flashlight, even in lit areas, to check for fine details, scratches, pry marks, anything out of place. The wind often created strange sounds around these buildings, rattling louvers or whistling through vents. I had learned to distinguish these common structural noises from anything truly unusual. My logbook was always updated with observations, no matter how minor. This particular rest stop had a flat roof, accessible only by an interior hatch in the janitor's closet. The tapping sound persisted as I approached the building. It was not the rhythmic clatter of a loose louver, nor the groan of the building expanding or contracting with temperature changes. This sound was irregular, a series of short, sharp impacts, followed by periods of silence. It seemed to originate from above the main restroom block. I paused my patrol, listening intently. The wind was picking up, carrying a faint whisper through the sparse trees bordering the rest area. I walked slowly around the perimeter, my gaze fixed on the roofline. The sodium lights did not reach that high, leaving the roof in deep shadow. I completed my initial exterior check, finding nothing amiss at ground level. Inside, the restrooms were empty. The fluorescent lights hummed with their familiar low buzz. I checked each stall, the sinks, and the hand dryers. As I moved through the men's room, I heard it again, more distinctly this time. A series of light, scuffing sounds, followed by a metallic click, directly above the ceiling panels. It sounded like someone was walking on the roof, perhaps near the roof hatch. The sound was muffled, but undeniable. I moved into the janitor's closet, where the roof hatch was located. It was a standard metal hatch, secured from the inside with a heavy-duty latch. I checked the latch. It was firmly engaged. I placed my hand on the cool metal of the hatch itself. I felt a faint vibration, a subtle tremor that seemed to coincide with the scuffing sounds from above. I stood there for a few minutes, listening. The sounds continued intermittently, a drag, a light tap, then silence. It was not the sound of an animal. It was too deliberate, too heavy. I considered the possibility of wind manipulating something on the roof, but the pattern felt wrong. I retrieved a small, portable audio recorder from my patrol vehicle, along with a contact microphone. I attached the contact mic to the roof hatch, running the cable to the recorder. The device was designed to pick up vibrations through solid surfaces. I then positioned a pair of sensitive, directional microphones outside, aimed at the roofline, hoping to capture the ambient sound more clearly. I returned to my patrol vehicle, leaving the recording equipment in place. I logged the incident in my report, noting the time and the nature of the sounds. From the relative quiet of my vehicle, I could still hear the faint, irregular tapping carried on the wind. I reviewed the CCTV feed from the rest stop cameras. The cameras covered the parking lot and the entrances, but not the roof itself. There was no visible activity of anyone approaching the building from the ground and scaling it. This suggested that if someone was on the roof, they had arrived by an unconventional method, or had been there for some time, undetected. The fog was thickening, reducing visibility across the gravel lot. I decided to wait, observing the building from a distance. About an hour passed. The tapping and scuffing sounds continued, sometimes fading, sometimes growing louder with gusts of wind. The contact mic inside the janitor's closet was recording a distinct series of impacts against the hatch itself. consistent with something being pressed or scraped against the metal. The directional mics outside picked up faint footfalls, a dragging sound, and then a distinct metallic chatter. The sound of the roof hatch latch being manipulated from the outside. This was a critical detail. Someone was actively trying to open the hatch from the roof. I radioed dispatch, reporting a potential trespasser on the roof of the rest stop. They advised me to maintain observation and await backup, which would take some time to arrive, given the isolation of the location. I kept my headlights off, relying on the ambient sodium light. The cold was settling in, and a thin layer of frost was beginning to form on the windshield. I watched the roofline, but the fog and the dim light made it impossible to discern any figures. The sounds continued, a persistent, unsettling presence above the building. The metallic chatter of the latch was particularly unnerving, a clear indication of intent. After about 20 minutes, the sounds abruptly stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. I waited another 10 minutes, scanning the roof and the surrounding forest line. Nothing. No movement, no sound. When backup arrived, a single RCMP officer, we approached the building cautiously. We circled the perimeter, flashlights cutting through the fog. The officer confirmed the lack of any ground-level entry points. We then entered the janitor's closet. The contact mic was still attached to the hatch. I checked the latch again. It was still secured. With the officer providing cover, I carefully unlatched the roof hatch. A blast of cold, damp air rushed in. I pushed the hatch open slowly, peering out onto the flat roof. The fog was thick up there, swirling around the vents and the compressor unit. We climbed onto the roof, flashlights sweeping the surface. The gravel covering the roof was damp from the fog. In the beam of my light, I saw them. Fresh footprints. They were clear, distinct impressions in the fine gravel, leading from the edge of the roof directly to the hatch. The prints were consistent with a heavy work boot, and they showed clear signs of scuffing and dragging. There were also distinct scrape marks on the metal frame of the hatch, consistent with someone trying to pry it open. We followed the trail of prints to the edge of the roof. They stopped abruptly at the parapet wall. There was no ladder, no rope, no obvious way up or down. The prints simply ended. We searched the entire roof surface, checking behind every vent and utility box. There was no one there. The fog made it difficult to see beyond a few yards, but the roof was not large enough to conceal a person. We took photographs of the footprints and the scrape marks on the hatch. The officer filed a report, noting the evidence of attempted entry and the unexplained disappearance of the individual. The incident was logged as a trespass, but the details remained unsettling. The official report noted the evidence of attempted forced entry on the roof hatch. The photographs of the footprints and the scrape marks were included in the file. My audio recordings provided clear evidence of the metallic chatter and the footfalls. Despite the thorough investigation, no suspect was ever identified. The RCMP patrol continued to check the rest stop more frequently for a few weeks, but nothing similar occurred. The incident was eventually closed, filed away as an unsolved case of attempted trespass. I continued my night watch patrols, but my perception of the rest stops had changed. I still hear the sound sometimes, especially on cold, foggy nights. It's not a physical sound, but an echo in my memory. The irregular tapping, the dragging scuff, and that distinct metallic chatter of the hatch latch. It was the sound of someone trying to get in, from a place where no one should have been. I was on night watch, patrolling the highway rest stop network. It was late autumn, the air barely above freezing, and a thin fog clung to the ground. That night, a subtle acoustic anomaly began to register. My shift started as usual, just after the sun had fully set, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. The rest stop block was a familiar structure of concrete and steel, designed for durability in harsh weather. My routine involved regular patrols of the main building, checking the restrooms, the vending alcoves, and the small information kiosk. The sodium lights cast a dim orange glow, barely penetrating the deeper corners of the building. The constant hum of the truck engines idling in the distant lot was a low, steady presence, a background drone to the isolation of the night. I carried a handheld radio, its static a quiet companion, connecting me to dispatch if needed. The air inside the building was always cool, a contrast to the warmth of my small patrol cabin a few miles down the highway. I knew every creak of the building, every rattle of the louvers when the wind picked up. The first instance was subtle, a sound I almost dismissed as the building settling or the wind playing tricks. I was in the main corridor, approaching the vending alcove. This area housed a row of soda machines and snack dispensers, their internal compressors cycling on and off at regular intervals. The hum of these machines was a constant feature of the night. As I drew closer, the compressor on the nearest soda machine kicked off, leaving a brief, distinct silence. In that momentary quiet, I heard it, a series of soft, deliberate footfalls, perhaps 5 or 6 steps, originating from directly behind the machines. The sound was distinct, a light scuffing on the concrete floor, then a pause. Before I could fully process it, the compressor whirred back to life, its mechanical drone swallowing any further sound. I stopped, listening, but heard nothing more than the usual ambient noise. I attributed it to fatigue, perhaps an auditory illusion in the quiet. I continued my patrol, making a full circuit of the building. The rest stop was empty save for a few truckers sleeping in their cabs. No other vehicles were present in the main lot. When I returned to the vending alcove about an hour later, the incident repeated itself. The compressor cycled down, and in the ensuing silence, the same distinct pattern of steps emerged from behind the machines. This time, I was closer, perhaps a dozen feet away. The steps were light, not heavy boots, but a steady, rhythmic progression. They faded after about 6 counts, just as the compressor engaged again. I approached the machines, shining my flashlight into the narrow gap between them and the back wall. The space was tight, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I saw nothing but dust and discarded wrappers. There were no visible tracks on the concrete floor, which was relatively clean. The air felt cold in that confined space, colder than the rest of the alcove. I checked the small access door to the janitor's closet, which was located directly behind the vending area. It was locked from the outside, as always. The third occurrence solidified my concern. It was perhaps an hour after the second. I had positioned myself discreetly near the alcove, out of sight, but within earshot. I wanted to confirm what I was hearing. The compressor cycled down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps. They were clear, precise, and then they stopped. The compressor immediately started up again. This time the sound felt too deliberate to be a random creak or a trick of the wind. I walked around the machines, checking the back wall, the floor, the ceiling. There was no ventilation shaft large enough. No obvious access point. The building's structure was solid concrete block. I logged the incidents in my guard notes, detailing the time and the specific machine involved. My report was factual, devoid of speculation. I simply recorded the observed acoustic events. The isolation of the night, the low hum of the machines, and the sudden, precise sounds in the quiet began to create a quiet dread. I decided to implement a more thorough investigation. I retrieved a pair of sensitive directional microphones from my patrol vehicle, along with a contact mic. My plan was to set up the paired mics to triangulate the sound source and attach the contact mic directly to the back wall behind the machines. I also reviewed the CCTV footage from the camera covering the vending alcove. The footage showed nothing unusual. No one entered or exited the area during the times I noted the sounds. The camera angle did not allow a view directly behind the machines, but it would have captured any person approaching or leaving the alcove. The video evidence was inconclusive, showing only an empty space. I set up the equipment. The paired mics were positioned to capture audio from the front and sides of the machines. The contact mic was affixed to the concrete wall directly behind the soda dispenser. I ran the cables to a small recording unit in the janitor's closet, ensuring the door remained locked from the outside. I then retreated to my vehicle, monitoring the audio feed through a small receiver. The night was still, the fog now thicker, reducing visibility to a few hundred feet. The cold seeped into the cabin of my truck despite the heater running. I logged the wind direction and ambient temperature, noting that there was barely any breeze, and the temperature remained just above freezing. This ruled out wind-induced structural creaks or fascia rattles as a likely source. I waited. The compressor cycles were predictable. Every few minutes, the hum would cease, followed by a brief silence, then the restart. I listened intently through the headphones. For about an hour, there was nothing but the expected mechanical sounds. Then, just as the compressor on the target machine powered down, the contact mic picked up a faint vibration, followed by the distinct, rhythmic scuffing. It was clearer now, amplified. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The sound was undeniably consistent with footsteps on concrete. The paired mics confirmed the origin point, directly behind the machine, moving from left to right, then stopping. The sound was not a reverberation or an echo. It was a direct, localized acoustic event. Yet the CCTV showed nothing. I conducted a series of tests. During the next compressor cycle, I walked slowly around the front of the machines, trying to replicate the sound. My own steps, even when light, registered differently on the mics. I tried tapping the wall, pushing against the machines. Nothing produced the same cadence or specific acoustic signature. I even used a small mallet to tap the concrete floor and wall in various places, attempting to simulate structural expansion or contraction. The sounds were distinct from the footfalls. The building's temperature log showed a steady decline throughout the night, but no sudden drops that would cause rapid material contraction. The wind log confirmed minimal air movement. The evidence pointed to a localized, rhythmic impact on the floor behind the machines, occurring only during the compressor's silent phase. I spent the remainder of the night documenting every instance. The pattern was consistent. 6 steps, always in the silence, always from the same location, always fading before the compressor restarted. It was as if something was moving through that narrow space, timing its passage precisely with the machine's cycle. The lack of visual evidence, combined with the clear audio, created a profound sense of unease. It was not a ghost story. It was a physical event that defied explanation. I filed a detailed report with my supervisor, including the audio recordings and my logbook entries. The RCMP was notified, and a brief investigation followed. They found no evidence of forced entry, no hidden compartments, no signs of human presence. The area was thoroughly examined, and nothing was found. The case was eventually filed as an unexplained acoustic phenomenon. The rest stop was eventually upgraded, and the old vending machines were replaced. The new units had different compressor cycles, and the specific acoustic anomaly never recurred. I was transferred to a different patrol route a few months later. The incident became a strange footnote in my career, a documented event without a logical conclusion. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls or a distant hum fills the air, I still hear that precise cadence. 6 steps, fading into silence. I was assigned to night watch at a highway rest stop, monitoring the facility and its grounds. It was late autumn, and the air held a sharp, penetrating cold, barely above freezing. The usual drone of distant truck traffic seemed to carry an unfamiliar, almost rhythmic quality that night. My routine involved patrols of the main building, the picnic shelters, and the perimeter trail. The rest stop was a common design, a single-story block with restrooms, a vending alcove, and a central information kiosk. Sodium lights cast a pale orange glow across the asphalt and the concrete structures. My equipment included a handheld thermal imager, a 2-way radio for dispatch, and a set of paired directional microphones for acoustic monitoring. I also kept a detailed logbook of observations, wind direction, and ambient temperatures. The isolation of these shifts was a constant presence. The highway hum was often the only sound for long stretches, broken by the occasional vehicle pulling in or out. My job was to observe, to report, and to maintain the security of the property. I had grown accustomed to the building's natural sounds. The low compressor hum from the vending machines, the subtle creaks of the fascia in the wind, the distant static on the radio. These were the normal acoustic landscape of the night. I often conducted audio sweeps, listening for anything that deviated from this expected pattern. The incident began around a few minutes past midnight. I was in the main office, reviewing the CCTV feed from the vending alcove. A faint, almost imperceptible sound registered on my acoustic monitoring system. It was a low, sustained hiss, distinct from the usual background noise. I isolated the audio channel connected to the contact mic I had placed inside the information kiosk. The kiosk was a large, freestanding unit, mostly plastic and laminated wood, filled with brochures. The sound was coming from within the kiosk itself. I listened more closely. The hiss had a subtle, reedy quality, like air escaping a narrow vent, or perhaps the rustle of paper. It was not the usual louver rattle caused by wind. I adjusted the gain on the contact mic. The sound became clearer, a soft, almost breathy whisper. It was not words, not yet, but an undeniable human-like exhalation. A sustained, low-frequency vibration against the kiosk's internal structure. I logged the observation, noting the precise time and the nature of the sound. The air in the office felt colder than usual, despite the thermostat setting. I continued to monitor the sound for about a minute. The whisper remained constant, a quiet, insistent presence. It seemed to emanate from the brochure rack section of the kiosk. I considered it might be a structural anomaly, perhaps wind vibrating a loose panel. I had encountered similar acoustic illusions before, where the building itself seemed to groan or sigh. I made a mental note to inspect the kiosk physically during my next patrol. Then, the sound changed. The whisper from the kiosk abruptly ceased. For a moment, there was only the familiar hum of the vending machines and the distant highway drone. Then, a new sound emerged, picked up by the directional microphone aimed toward the picnic shelter corridor. It was a human voice. The voice was low, almost a murmur, but undeniably articulate. It sounded like a direct response to the whisper that had just stopped. The voice was not speaking words I could discern, but the cadence, the inflection was clear. It was a quiet, conversational tone, as if answering a question or acknowledging a presence. My attention immediately shifted to the CCTV feed covering the picnic shelter corridor. The corridor was empty, bathed in the pale sodium light. There was no visible movement, no figure, no shadow. I replayed the audio, isolating the two channels. The whisper from the kiosk, then the answering voice from the corridor. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. The cold in the office seemed to deepen, a physical sensation on my skin. I felt a quiet dread begin to settle. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, informing dispatch I was investigating an acoustic anomaly. My voice was calm, procedural. I moved through the building, checking each restroom, the janitor closets, and the vending alcove. Everything was secure, undisturbed. The air was still, the only sounds the hum of the machines and my own footsteps on the polished concrete. I approached the information kiosk, my flashlight beam sweeping across its laminated surfaces. I pressed my ear against the plastic. There was no whisper now, only the faint internal resonance of the structure. I then moved toward the picnic shelter corridor, my thermal imager scanning ahead. The corridor was an open-sided structure, leading to a small wooded trail behind the rest stop. The imager showed no heat signatures, only the cold concrete and the bare branches of the forest beyond. The gravel path leading to the trail was undisturbed. There were no fresh tracks in the light frost that had settled earlier in the evening. The silence in the corridor felt heavy, almost oppressive. I walked its full length, checking each bench and the small storage shed at the far end. All were empty. I returned to the office, reviewing the CCTV footage again. I slowed the playback, frame by frame, focusing on the corridor and the area around the kiosk. Nothing. No one entered, no one left. The only movement was the occasional flicker of the sodium lights. I cross-referenced my wind log and temperature log. The wind had been negligible, a light breeze from the north, not strong enough to cause significant structural vibrations. The temperature had remained steady, barely above freezing, ruling out rapid expansion or contraction of building materials. The evidence was contradictory. The audio was clear, but the visual confirmation was absent. I spent the next hour conducting a thorough sweep of the entire rest stop property. I walked the perimeter trail, my flashlight cutting through the fog that had begun to roll in from the forest. The trail was quiet, The only sounds the crunch of gravel under my boots and the distant hum of the highway. I checked the small cabin used for equipment storage, finding it locked and undisturbed. I took photographs of the frost patterns on the ground, looking for any sign of passage. There was nothing. The isolation of the rest stop felt more profound than usual. I filed a detailed report with dispatch, outlining the acoustic events and the lack of visual evidence. I included the audio recordings from the paired microphones and the contact mic. The report was factual, procedural, devoid of speculation. I noted the discrepancy between the clear audio and the absence of any physical presence. The RCMP would likely review the file, but without further evidence, it would remain an unexplained incident. The cold seemed to linger in the office, a persistent chill that no amount of heating could dispel. The incident was officially logged as an unexplained acoustic anomaly. My superiors reviewed the evidence, listened to the recordings, and found no fault in my procedure. They acknowledged the clarity of the audio, but could offer no explanation for the lack of visual confirmation. The kiosk was inspected for loose panels or faulty wiring, but nothing was found. The picnic shelter corridor remained empty on subsequent patrols. I still work the night watch at that rest stop. I still conduct my patrols, still monitor the acoustic systems. Sometimes, late at night, when the highway is quiet and the fog rolls in, I listen for it. I listen for that specific whisper, that reedy sound from the kiosk, and the low answering voice from the corridor. I still hear it sometimes, in the quiet spaces between the hum of the machines and the distant static on the radio. I was on the night watch, monitoring the highway rest stop facility. It was late autumn, the air barely above freezing, and a thin fog had settled over the asphalt. A faint, rhythmic sound began to register on the exterior microphones. My shift started just after midnight, a quiet stretch of highway about 3 miles from the nearest small town. The rest stop block was a standard design, a long, low structure of concrete and steel, housing restrooms, vending machines, and a small information kiosk. My post was in a small, insulated cabin tucked behind the main building, equipped with monitors for the CCTV feeds and audio pickups. The usual sounds of the night were a constant presence: the low hum of the vending machine compressors, the distant drone of trucks on the highway, and the occasional creak of the building's fascia as the temperature dropped. I logged these ambient noises routinely, part of the job's procedural rhythm. The exterior microphones, paired and directional, were sensitive instruments, designed to pick up anything beyond the expected. This particular night, the fog seemed to amplify the silence between the highway traffic. My routine involved hourly checks of the perimeter cameras and a sweep of the audio channels. I also maintained a logbook of wind direction and temperature fluctuations, as these factors often created acoustic illusions. Wind on the louvers of the exhaust vents could sound like a whisper, and the expansion and contraction of the building materials often produced sharp, sudden noises. I had learned to differentiate these structural sounds from anything genuinely external. The rest stop was isolated, surrounded by a dense forest that pressed close to the highway's edge. There were no residential areas nearby, only the long, dark stretch of road. My only regular contact was with dispatch, a voice that crackled over the radio every few hours. The job demanded a certain analytical detachment, a focus on data and observation rather than speculation. The first anomaly was subtle, a soft, scuffing sound picked up by the microphone array on the west side of the building. It was distinct from the usual wind noise. I cross-referenced it with the wind log. The air was still, barely a breath. I adjusted the gain, isolating the channel. The sound was faint, like footsteps on gravel, but too regular to be an animal. I checked the CCTV feed for that section, but the angle was limited, showing only the back wall and a small patch of the service road. Nothing moved within the camera's view. I made a note in the logbook, marking it as an unidentified acoustic event. About an hour later, the sound returned, this time clearer and closer. It was definitely footsteps, moving with a deliberate, even pace. The paired mics allowed me to track the sound as it moved from the west side, around the north face of the building, and then towards the east. It sounded like someone was walking a slow, continuous circuit around the entire rest stop block. I watched the monitors intently, my gaze sweeping across the various camera feeds. The sodium lights cast long, stark shadows, but the perimeter remained empty. The footsteps continued, a steady, measured rhythm on the gravel path that circled the building for maintenance access. I could hear the crunch of small stones underfoot. I activated the contact mic I had recently installed on the building's concrete foundation, hoping to pick up any ground vibrations. It registered a low thrum, a faint resonance that matched the rhythm of the footsteps. This confirmed the presence of something physical, something heavy enough to transmit through the ground. The sound then moved out of range of the contact mic as it continued its circuit. I felt a cold prickle on my skin, a sensation that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. There was no reason for anyone to be walking around the building's perimeter at this hour, especially not in such a methodical way. Then, a vehicle appeared on the main highway camera. It was a dark sedan, moving slowly, almost idling, before pulling off into the rest stop parking lot. It drove past the main entrance, circled the parking area once, and then exited back onto the highway. This was unusual. Most vehicles either stopped for a break or passed through without entering the lot. This sedan had done neither. It had simply performed a slow, deliberate loop. I noted the time and the vehicle description in my logbook. Barely 10 minutes later, the same sedan reappeared on the highway camera. It repeated its previous action, entering the rest stop, circling the parking lot, and then exiting. This time, as it passed under the main entrance light, I managed to get a clear image of the license plate. I ran the plate through the internal grid system, which cross-referenced it with known vehicle types and common routes. The system indicated a local registration, but the vehicle had no recorded history of stopping at this particular rest area. The footsteps had stopped during the sedan's first pass, and they remained absent during its second. It was as if the two events were connected, a coordinated sequence. I reviewed the CCTV footage of the sedan's movements, paying close attention to its entry and exit points. The rest stop had a frontage road that ran parallel to the highway, a small service lane used by local traffic and maintenance crews. The sedan, after its second loop, had not simply re-entered the highway. It had taken the frontage road, disappearing behind a dense line of trees that obscured the view from the main cameras. This frontage road had a small, unmonitored cut-through that led directly back to the highway, about a mile down the road. It was a known blind spot in the overall security network. I realized then what had happened. The sedan was not just looping the rest stop. It was using the frontage road and the cut-through to create the illusion of a longer journey, making it seem as though it had left the area entirely, only to reappear shortly after. This was a deliberate maneuver, designed to test the response time or the vigilance of anyone monitoring the site. The footsteps, then, were not random. They were part of the same operation. A probe. Someone was actively testing the perimeter, while the sedan provided a distraction or a cover. The quiet dread intensified. This was not a casual trespass. This was planned. I immediately contacted dispatch, relaying the sequence of events and the license plate information. My voice was calm, factual, as I described the circling footsteps, the sedan's repeated loops, and the suspected use of the frontage road cut-through. Dispatch acknowledged, creating an incident report and alerting the local RCMP detachment. I continued to monitor the feeds, but the footsteps did not resume, and the sedan did not reappear. The rest of the night passed in an unnerving silence, broken only by the usual hums and the occasional distant truck. I reviewed all the footage, isolating the audio tracks from the paired mics. The evidence was clear. The distinct crunch of gravel, the rhythmic cadence, the precise timing. I took photographs of the sedan's license plate from the clearest CCTV frame. In the morning, when the relief arrived, I handed over my logbook and a detailed report. The RCMP arrived later that day, taking my statement and collecting the video and audio evidence. They confirmed the license plate belonged to a vehicle registered to an address in a town about an hour away. The incident was filed as a suspicious activity report, but no arrests were made, and no clear motive was ever established. The security cameras were eventually re-angled to cover the frontage road approach more effectively, and additional motion sensors were installed along the perimeter. The incident became a file number, a data point in the system. But the memory of those footsteps, circling the isolated block in the cold night, remains. I still hear it sometimes, the quiet crunch of gravel, a sound that implied a presence, a deliberate intent, just beyond the reach of the light. I was the night watchman assigned to the highway rest stop network. It was a cold night in late autumn, the air sharp with the promise of frost. A sound began that was not part of the building's usual rhythm. My shift had started just after sundown, the sky a deep, bruised purple over the distant forest line. The rest stop block, a concrete and steel structure, sat a few hundred feet from the main highway. Its low sodium lights cast a sickly orange glow across the asphalt and the few parked trucks. My job involved monitoring the facility, ensuring security, and logging environmental data. I sat in the small, insulated office, a single window facing the truck parking area. The constant, low hum of idling diesel engines was the prevailing sound, a deep thrum that vibrated through the floor. I had a bank of monitors displaying CCTV feeds from various points around the block, and audio feeds from paired microphones placed strategically within the restrooms and vending alcoves. The air temperature had been steadily dropping since sunset, now hovering barely above freezing. This cold snap often caused the building materials to contract, leading to a series of groans and creaks in the fascia. I was used to these sounds, logging them as routine structural adjustments. Then, a distinct click echoed from the men's restroom audio feed. It was the sound of a door closer engaging, sharp and metallic. My routine was precise, dictated by a detailed operations manual. Every hour I checked the exterior perimeter, walking the gravel path that circled the facility, noting any changes in the environment. I logged wind direction and speed, ambient temperature, and any unusual vehicle activity. Inside, I monitored the building's systems. The paired mics were sensitive, designed to pick up everything from a dropped coin to the subtle rattle of a louver in a strong gust of wind. Contact microphones were also attached to key structural points, allowing me to differentiate between external wind stress and internal building movements. The rest stop was an isolated outpost, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest. The only constant was the highway, a ribbon of sound and light in the vast night. My office, a small cabin within the larger structure, was my command center, filled with the soft glow of screens and the low static of the radio. The cold intensified as the hours passed, the temperature dropping several degrees below freezing. I noted the change in my logbook, observing the first signs of frost forming on the window pane. The door closer clicks from the men's restroom began to increase in frequency. These devices, designed to slowly pull a door shut, often became more active in extreme cold. The hydraulic fluid inside them would thicken, causing the mechanism to engage with a more pronounced, almost percussive sound as the door moved. I watched the audio waveform on my monitor, noting the sharp spikes. Each click was distinct, a metallic snap, followed by a faint hiss as the door eased shut. This was normal behavior for the equipment in such conditions. I made a mental note to include it in my end-of-shift report, a common occurrence during winter. The clicks were sporadic at first, then settled into a rhythm, almost as if someone was repeatedly entering and exiting the stalls. I leaned closer to the audio monitor, adjusting the gain. The clicks were coming from the stall area, specifically the row closest to the exterior wall. I could hear the faint, hollow echo of the restroom space around each click. It was a consistent pattern, a series of 3 or 4 clicks, a pause, then another series. This was unusual. Even with thermal contraction, the closers rarely acted in such a synchronized manner. I cross-referenced the audio with the CCTV feed for the men's restroom entrance. No one had entered or exited for the past hour. The parking lot was quiet, only a few trucks idling, their headlights occasionally sweeping across the building as they shifted position. The only other sound was the steady hum of the vending machine compressor from the alcove adjacent to the restroom. Then, a new sound emerged, cutting through the metallic clicks. It was a single, distinct heel click. It was not the sharp mechanical sound of the door closers. This was a different resonance, a harder, more solid impact, like a shoe striking ceramic tile. The sound was clear, unmistakable. It registered on the audio feed from the microphone positioned near the stall entrances. The heel click was followed by a brief silence, then another door closer click. I isolated the audio track, replaying the sequence. The heel click was precise, singular. It was not an echo of the door closer. It had a different acoustic signature, a heavier, more grounded quality. My focus narrowed entirely on this new sound. The heel click repeated. This time, it was followed by a second click, then a third, moving in a deliberate sequence. The sound was pacing, crossing the gap between the stalls. It was a slow, measured cadence. 3 distinct clicks, then a pause. It moved from the far end of the stall row, near the exterior wall, toward the side exit door of the restroom. I could track its progression across the audio field. The sound was too distinct, too consistent to be a random structural noise or a trick of the wind. The contact mics on the stall walls registered faint vibrations in sync with the heel clicks, confirming the physical presence of an impact within the space. The air in my small office felt colder, despite the insulation. I checked the CCTV feed again, specifically the camera covering the side exit door of the men's restroom. Nothing. The door remained closed, unmoving. No one had entered or exited the facility. I accessed the wind log and the temperature log. There were no sudden gusts of wind that could have caused a door to swing or a structure to creak in such a way. The temperature had remained stable for the past 30 minutes, just below freezing. The building's expansion and contraction were minimal during this period. The heel clicks continued, now closer to the side exit door. They stopped abruptly, followed by a final, sharp door closer click. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the highway and the low buzz of the sodium lights outside. The audio feed from the men's restroom was now completely quiet, save for the faint ambient background noise. I decided to investigate in person. I grabbed my flashlight and the handheld thermal imager. The walk to the men's restroom block felt longer than usual. The low sodium light outside cast long, distorted shadows. The air was still, biting cold. I could see my breath in the beam of my flashlight. The gravel crunched under my boots, a loud sound in the quiet night. I approached the restroom entrance cautiously, listening. There was no sound from within. I pushed the door open slowly. The air inside was cold, stagnant. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly, casting a harsh, sterile glow. The row of stalls was empty. The side exit door was closed and latched. I walked the length of the restroom, checking each stall. They were all empty. I ran the thermal imager over the floor, the walls, and the side exit door. There were no heat signatures, no indication of any recent presence. The ceramic tiles were uniformly cold to the touch. I checked the door closers on each stall. They were all functioning correctly, stiff in the cold but otherwise normal. I returned to my office, the quiet dread settling deeper. I reviewed the audio recordings again, isolating the heel clicks. They were undeniably there, clear and distinct. I cross-referenced the contact mic data. The vibrations were consistent with a solid impact on the floor, not a structural creak or a pipe knock. The evidence was acoustic, but the visual and thermal data offered no corroboration. It was an impossible event. I filed a detailed report, documenting the acoustic anomaly, the wind and temperature logs, and the CCTV footage review. I attached the audio recordings and the thermal scan data. The report was factual, procedural, avoiding any speculation. My supervisor reviewed it the following morning. He listened to the audio, examined the logs, and checked the equipment. No malfunction was found with the microphones or the CCTV system. The incident was logged as an unexplained acoustic event. There was no further action. The memory of those distinct heel clicks, pacing across the restroom floor, remains with me. It was the sound of something moving with intent, yet leaving no trace. I still hear it sometimes, especially on cold, still nights when the wind is quiet and the highway hums its low, constant note. I was the night watchman for a highway rest stop network in northern Alberta. My shift began just after sunset, a time when the cold began to settle deep into the forest. A faint, irregular creak from the building's fascia was the first small irregularity I noted that evening. The air was already sharp, barely above freezing, and a thin fog had started to drift across the highway. My duties involved securing the main service block, monitoring the vending alcoves, and checking the remote info kiosks. The rest stop sat isolated, a pocket of sodium light against the vast, dark expanse of the boreal forest. The constant hum of idling trucks in the parking lot was a familiar, low drone. I carried a small radio, its static a quiet companion in the long hours. The main block was a single-story structure of concrete and steel, designed for durability in harsh conditions. Its internal acoustics were usually predictable, a symphony of compressors, ventilation fans, and the occasional distant rumble of heavy transport. I had learned to distinguish every groan and shudder the building made. This particular creak, however, was new. It seemed to come from the western wall, near the men's restroom block. I logged it in my digital logbook, a minor detail in a night that promised little deviation. The cold outside was intensifying, and I could feel it seeping through the thick glass of the main entrance. My routine was precise, developed over many months of solitary patrols. I would conduct a full perimeter check every hour, ensuring all access points were secure. Inside, I monitored the CCTV feeds from a small office, a cabin-like space tucked behind the main vending area. The paired microphones I had installed were crucial. One was in the main hallway, the other near the service entrance, both feeding into a dedicated audio recorder. These devices helped me track the subtle sounds of the building, differentiating wind on louvers from a potential trespasser. I also kept a detailed wind log and temperature log, noting how external conditions affected the structure. The building itself was a living entity in the quiet of the night, expanding and contracting with the temperature shifts. These shifts often produced groans and pops, sounds I had cataloged and learned to ignore. My job was to filter out the normal and identify the anomalous. The highway outside was a ribbon of black, occasionally punctuated by the bright headlights of a passing vehicle. The isolation was profound, broken only by the distant roar of an engine or the whisper of the wind through the pines. It was a little past midnight when the incident occurred. I was in my office, reviewing the CCTV feed from the main entrance, watching the occasional traveler come and go. The low hum of the vending machines was a steady backdrop. Suddenly, two distinct, heavy knocks echoed through the hallway. They were not the sharp, metallic sounds of something falling, nor the dull thud of a door closing. These were deep, resonant impacts, almost percussive, like something solid striking a dense surface. The first knock was followed by the second after a very brief pause, perhaps a second or two. The sound was loud enough to cut through the ambient noise of the building. I felt a slight vibration in the floor beneath my feet, a subtle tremor that confirmed the force of the impact. My immediate reaction was to check the hallway camera. The feed showed an empty corridor, the sodium light casting long, sterile shadows. No one was visible. I rewound the footage for the past few minutes, but nothing on screen correlated with the sound. The hallway remained empty. I then switched to the audio feed from the paired microphones. The recording clearly captured the two knocks. They were distinct, heavy, and undeniably present. The first knock registered a peak amplitude, then a brief silence, followed by a second, slightly softer but still forceful knock. The sound seemed to originate from the area near the men's restroom entrance, close to the main drain access panel. I grabbed my flashlight and moved out of the office, walking slowly down the main hallway. The air was cool, carrying the faint, clean scent of disinfectant. I checked the men's restroom, finding it empty and undisturbed. The stalls were all open, the sinks dry. I ran my hand along the wall where the sound seemed to have come from. The concrete felt cold and solid. There were no visible marks, no scuffs, no signs of impact. I checked the drain access panel, a heavy steel plate secured with bolts. It was flush with the wall, undisturbed. I listened intently, but the building was quiet again, save for the familiar hum of the ventilation system. The silence after such a distinct sound felt heavier than usual. I continued my patrol, checking the women's restroom, the family washroom, and the janitor's closet. Everything was in order. The vending alcoves were quiet, the machines glowing with their internal lights. I walked the perimeter of the building, shining my light into the dark corners of the parking lot. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to a few dozen yards. Headlights from passing trucks appeared suddenly out of the mist, then vanished just as quickly. The gravel crunched under my boots. I found nothing out of place outside either. The incident felt isolated, a sudden, unexplained acoustic event. I returned to my office, the memory of those 2 knocks lingering in the quiet. I made a detailed entry in the logbook, noting the time, the nature of the sound, and my immediate observations. I also flagged the audio recording for later, more thorough analysis. The feeling of isolation deepened, the forest pressing in from all sides. The next few hours passed without further incident, but the memory of the knocks remained sharp. I spent a considerable amount of time replaying the audio from the paired microphones. The clarity of the recording was unsettling. The sounds were too deliberate, too heavy to be a simple structural creak or a pipe settling. I began to consider external factors. I checked the wind log. The wind had been steady from the northwest, a moderate breeze, not strong enough to cause such impacts. The temperature log showed a gradual drop, consistent with the season, but no sudden fluctuations that might stress the building's materials. My attention then turned to the CCTV footage. I reviewed the camera feeds from the exterior of the building, specifically the area near the men's restroom exit. There was a small, secondary door there, rarely used, leading directly to the parking lot. The camera covered the door in a small patch of gravel outside. I scrubbed through the footage from a few minutes before the knocks, and then during and after. Nothing. The door remained closed. No one approached it. No one left. The fog outside made distant visibility poor, but anything close to the door would have been clear. I then focused on the interior hallway camera again, specifically the floor area near the exit bar of the men's restroom. I zoomed in, enhancing the image. It took several passes, but I eventually saw it. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, directly beneath the exit bar of the men's restroom door. It was a dark, elongated smudge, perhaps a few inches long, inconsistent with the usual foot traffic. The floor was a light gray linoleum, and the mark stood out subtly against it. It was positioned as if something had been dragged or scraped across the floor, then paused. This discovery changed the nature of the incident. The scuff mark implied a human presence, a physical interaction with the door. I immediately went back to the location, armed with a high-intensity flashlight and a small camera. I photographed the scuff mark from multiple angles, using a scale for reference. The mark was shallow but distinct. It appeared to be a transfer of material, possibly from a shoe sole or the bottom of a bag. The position of the mark, directly under the exit bar, suggested someone had paused there, perhaps bracing themselves against the door or leaning on it. I then cross-referenced the timing of the knocks with the operations of the nearby truck wash. The rest stop had a large, automated truck wash facility, about a quarter-mile down the highway. Its drainage system occasionally caused pressure surges in the main sewer lines that ran beneath the rest stop block. I checked the facility's operational log. Sure enough, a major wash cycle had been initiated just moments before the first knock. The timing was too precise to be a coincidence. The drain surge would have caused a sudden, powerful vibration through the pipes, potentially impacting the building's structure. This explained the acoustic event. However, the scuff mark remained. The drain surge explained the sound, but not the evidence of a human pause at the door. The two pieces of evidence, while seemingly unrelated, now formed a disturbing picture. Someone had been at that door at that exact moment, when the building itself had groaned under the pressure of the drain surge. The implication was that the knocks, while acoustically explained, had coincided with a human presence, a presence that had left a subtle, physical trace. I filed a detailed report with dispatch, including the photographs and audio analysis. The RCMP would receive a copy of the file. The official report concluded that the heavy knocks were indeed a result of the drain surge from the truck wash facility. The pressure wave traveling through the underground pipes had caused a localized structural vibration, manifesting as the distinct percussive sounds. This was a known, albeit rare, phenomenon in older plumbing systems. The scuff mark, however, remained an anomaly. It was noted as unexplained in the final logbook entry. There was no further evidence of trespass, no missing items, and no other disturbances reported. The CCTV footage, even after extensive review by a specialist, showed no individual entering or exiting the men's restroom around the time of the incident. The fog had been too thick to identify anyone in the parking lot. The incident was officially closed, attributed to a combination of environmental factors and an unidentifiable, fleeting human presence. I continued my night watch duties, the routine resuming its familiar rhythm. The building settled back into its usual creaks and hums. The cold nights returned, and the highway remained a dark, lonely stretch. Despite the official explanation, the memory of those two heavy knocks, perfectly timed with the subtle scuff, never quite faded. I still hear them sometimes, especially on nights when the wind whispers through the louvers and the truck wash is active. The sound of the drain surge now carries a different weight. It is a reminder of how easily the mundane can align with the unsettling, leaving behind a quiet, persistent dread. The forest outside still feels vast and watchful, and the isolation of the rest stop seems more profound than before.